What's up guys, Jimmy here. As you can probably tell, I love Elastos. I know that I do a lot of videos on it, I tweet about it, I do a bunch of side projects and development work with the core team as well as with the Cyber Republic. But you also might notice the wonderful Elastos t-shirt that I'm wearing. This is courtesy of CryptoPosters.com. Those awesome people actually sent me a shirt. They knew that I loved arcade games, as you can very well tell, and they had a design in their store that also had the Elastos as well as the arcadey type Tetris feel to it. They sent this out to me. It's a fantastic shirt, but if you go check out their store at, again, CryptoPosters.com, I'll leave a link in the description for you, you'll actually find all of the crypto bling so that you can actually support the projects that you know and love. So again, go check them out at CryptoPosters.com. I'll see you there. What's up guys, Jimmy here again with another Elastos video. This one's going to be in somewhat of a different tone, more or less a call to action, but in this video we're going to kind of go over the history of Elastos, all the things they've tried to do to solve problems in the past, and sort of where they are now, and really where we could use the most help. Now, Elastos is actually not really a new project. You might actually see this fresh new Elastos website, and if you can manage to find your way around it, you might actually think that Elastos is just a blockchain project. But in reality, there are a bunch of moving parts to Elastos, not necessarily just the blockchain piece, not necessarily just this DApp piece, and not necessarily just like the cryptocurrency side, but in reality, Elastos is an entire ecosystem. And with that said, Elastos actually has an entirely different arm, which is the Cyber Republic, which is in essence the community that is the evangelical group for the Elastos Foundation. They're responsible for putting ambassadors out into the field, recruiting talent, developers, marketers, bloggers, YouTubers, I mean, really anyone that is willing to help. And the Elastos Foundation focuses on core developments of the Elastos blockchain nodes, carrier, operating system components, etc. But that's actually what you see Elastos as today. But in reality, Elastos actually began as far back as 2000. And the founder of Elastos, Rong Chen, has actually been working on Elastos for a number of years in both academic and commercial perspectives. As a matter of fact, a little bit of digging on the internet, you can see even where Elastos is mentioned back in 2006, where Rong Chen was actually suggesting to a group of Lua developers how they could potentially utilize Elastos or the component assembly runtime to bridge Lua to native C, C++ code, which is actually a really difficult problem to solve for a lot of programmers. As a matter of fact, it usually requires you to write a bunch of glue code and that actually glues two different programming languages together. He was actually proposing the component assembly runtime at this stage to effectively write once, deploy everywhere, years before this was even really a thing. Now, that was just one component of the entire Elastos ecosystem. As a matter of fact, Elastos as an operating system had component assembly runtimes built into the core of it, but it had many different incarnations. Now, the interesting piece is Elastos was actually commercialized in the past through a company called CoreTide. And looking at the CoreTide website, we have a couple of different things that are available in the Wayback Machine. So this one was from May of 2006, so again around that same time. But does any of this actually look familiar? Most of this is the stuff that Elastos is still trying to do, but in a much different way. You have to understand that at the time, Elastos was trying to write an operating system, or Elastos was an operating system. CoreTide was actually in charge of it. Well, the interesting thing about it is writing an operating system is insanely difficult. You have to target a whole bunch of different hardware platforms. Targeting a Raspberry Pi is a lot different than targeting a laptop, it's a lot different than targeting a cell phone. And Elastos was making headway in the embedded IoT space, IOEX, anyone? And they were making headway there, and then you started to see things like iPhones come out. and Android. And actually, if you think I'm lying, we can actually look at a slideshow that CoreTide put together, again, around the same time that they were trying to sell Elastos into embedded environments. And as a matter of fact, you can see that they go through the entire history here in the CoreTide slideshow, from Windows 3.1 to DOS, and then .NET, Windows 2000. You see all of this stuff building up to what is the fundamentals of a network-based operating system. So for example, URL-based binary executables. Well, back in the day, that was a funny way of saying that, well, this is really a smart web. So instead of going to a URL today and you get back HTML and JavaScript and you see this page of data, now, if you go to a URL in the Elastos ecosystem, you get an application. That is the true smart web, as opposed to a smartphone, because what's the difference between a regular phone and a smartphone? Smartphones have apps. Smart web is basically a web of applications. And again, this is 2006, so they were pitching this way back then. And again, this Elastos model is what we see them striving for with the Trinity browser today. And I'll get into that in a second. Now, we see a bunch of different things go through here, but really is trying to break down effectively what Elastos is proposing and how it's different from the current internet. But one thing that's really interesting here is this pitch of a cell phone. So we actually have XML-based graphics user interface. And again, 2006, okay? 12 years later, this is standardized technology. They were at least 5 years ahead of their time. And again, instead of having XML-based graphics user interface, now we just use HTML, pretty standard constructs. But again, this is a very interesting thing, the cell phone here, because what was the death of Elastos? Well, the death of Elastos commercially was the birth of iOS and Android. So around 2007, just 1 year later here, Steve Jobs is launching the iPhone to the world, and all of a sudden, well, okay, what do we do? Well, either you have to niche down, and that's actually what they did. They started going into, again, focusing on the embedded niche, you know, or you have to try to take on the big boys, and that's just not sustainable whenever you have, you know, Apple, you know, which is now, of course, a $1 trillion company. They weren't at the time. So again, this is, you know, the underpinnings, okay, this is the birth of Elastos. And again, pervasive and peer-to-peer computing. This is the birth of the carrier network. Again, back in 2006. We also see constructs here in an academic stance about this thing called Linux. And in reality, Linux was basically a fork of the Linux kernel with the Elastos constructs built into it. So instead, the kernel's network internals were removed so that it couldn't communicate with the outside web, but instead could communicate through the Elastos ecosystem. And again, what we're seeing now is the rebirth of this, but through Trinity. So now instead of having an entire operating system, you have an application that runs inside of your existing operating system that has a bunch of Elastos-enabled applications within it. So we're seeing the rebirth of this. Now, you might ask yourself, is this wasted effort? Are we just rehashing the same things? No, I firmly believe no. I believe that Elastos is doing the right thing because they need to target a wider audience. They need to get regular consumers involved, people who usually don't use blockchain. And how do they do that? They make it run on the operating system that they're already running, so Windows, Mac, Linux. Now that's actually where they've come from and a lot about what they're doing right. Now here's the deal. Here's where Elastos can actually use quite a bit of help. If you go to the Elastos repository on GitHub and you look at the repositories, they're kind of scattered. It's really difficult to get up and running compared to other projects like Neo and Nulls and things like that, or NOS. I was up and running there in a few clicks, and whereas Elastos, it really makes you want to pull your hair out. So what could we do? We could definitely use help on the developer side, or even the DevOps side. If you're familiar with deployment tools or container tools, again, Docker, Vagrant, you know, common technologies that are used to deploy web apps, you can really help us out here on the Elastos project by making it's so easy for developers to get going by just clicking once or twice and kind of having their environment ready to go. Again, I experienced this with those projects I just mentioned. The other thing is, I don't know why the Elastos.os is the first repo that is actually mentioned, because Elastos.os hasn't been updated in months. Whereas you're seeing quite a bit of work go into the ELA side chains, SPV, carrier native, etc. So maybe you should pin those a little bit farther up. The other piece is we need more uniformity in terms of the messaging between the Cyber Republic and the Elastos Foundation. Now again, I am a huge fan of Elastos. Again, sure. But we really need to make sure that the Foundation and the Cyber Republic are in lockstep. Now make no mistake, the Cyber Republic is largely funded by the Elastos Foundation, and many of those projects are actually furthering the vision that has been established by that foundation. But we need them to stay in lockstep. So again, if you're listening from this from a marketing perspective, etc., and you're interested in joining the Cyber Republic, just know that there are two different sides at play here. And if you're involved already, then please make an effort again to stay in communication with each other. We desperately need that. Again, Elastos as an ecosystem is so large. We have low-level systems developers, graphics designers, and even web technology developers that are all working on this from 3 completely different lenses of retrospect and experience. We definitely need as much communication as we can. Now, the one thing that Elastos, again, is doing right is this CR100. This is a bunch of business use cases that people can learn about. They can actually see the real applications, the real-world applications of Elastos. So again, take a look at that. That is one thing that was supremely put together by our friends at the Cyber Republic. Again, we really love that. Now again, Elastos is not necessarily run like a completely disorganized open source project. As a matter of fact, it's not very common in open source projects where you can contribute code and get rewarded. So the Cyber Republic does actually have a bunch of tasks that they need help with. And if you actually take on one of these tasks and complete it to a satisfactory degree, you will actually get paid in Elastos tokens. And that is a great thing, because most free open source projects, you do it just for the good of helping the community. And I think that's fantastic. But here, you actually get a little bit more than that. So again, that's one thing that Elastos is definitely doing correctly. But again, we need your help. It's a very difficult thing standing up an ecosystem this large. Which brings me to another point. Elastos, I think, is selling people on, and really technology, they're selling their technology to companies as you have to buy the entire ecosystem. Okay, and I don't think that you get a lot of buy-in by doing that. And case in point, actually, is my website, PeerJet. Okay, this is a great example of not selling the entire ecosystem, because Elastos is saying, okay, we're going to develop distributed applications. They're communicate on carrier, but they're only accessible through Trinity. And I don't necessarily think that's the best thing. Because you're saying that you have to spend all this money up front to rewrite your app, to kind of refactor it. And in reality, what PeerJet and what Carrier is doing is it sort of drops into the applications you already have. So I think that it's important for Elastos to allow people to bite off bite-sized chunks of the Elastos ecosystem, kind of try it before you buy it, see the technology, so they want to go to step 2, step 3, step 4. And I'm actually doing a couple of different things, again, PeerJet is one of them, to get people interested in certain aspects of Elastos and start to onboard themselves and consequently their developer teams, if they're companies, onto the Elastos ecosystem. And then eventually we will have companies that become fully realized that they are embedded in Elastos-based technologies. So again, these are just sort of my opinions, okay? These are things that I've noticed during my almost 2 months now of being involved with Elastos in some retrospects. and the Cyber Republic. I am also stepping up my involvements with the Cyber Republic to a minimum of 10 hours a week. So I will be helping them ship modifications to core Elastos components. We'll be doing more videos for the Cyber Republic, more projects like PeerJet. There's a lot of stuff revolving around DPoS, some really cool stuff that we're tinkering with there that we've been sharing on Twitter, and things that we're going to work together on. So again, if you're a developer, a DevOps person, a marketer, a blogger, a YouTuber, and you really want to get involved, please reach out to me, and I'll drop some contact information, or leave a comment. Reach out to me on Twitter, and we can actually get you rolling inside of the Cyber Republic. That way, you can kind of start slow, and if it's something you like, we can kind of ramp up and get you involved in a greater capacity. And again, make no mistake, I love Elastos. I'm going to continue to help. And again, if you have any questions, I hope that this answers a lot of questions that I've gotten with regards to where has Elastos come from, where are they going, what are some of the problems that I see with Elastos, and how am I helping? And again, I really appreciate it, and I'll see you on the next video.